Hello YouTube, my name is Stefan Hartman, physician assistant, exercise science specialist, and health coach at ironmedicinepa.com. We're going to be going through a lecture today on weight management, a long-term solution. This isn't going to be one of those fad diets or do this Herbalife. We're going to be going through the literature and talking about practical ways to control weight. So, introduction here, exercise, do it, whether you're doing a progressive resistance training program or simply walking. It's effective, we all know this. Nutrient density, we're going to see how this may be superior over just focusing on cutting the calories, while cutting calories is important. And other factors such as sleep, stress, inflammation, hormones, that sort of thing. Let's see here. Okay. So, we all know that excess weight predisposes the individual to a host of problems. We know that in men, more adipose, so fat cells, results in higher estrogen. In women, excess weight increases the risk of polycystic ovarian syndrome and infertility, and androgenization, which is more masculinization. And while excess weight is problematic for body image, there's actually some concerning data coming out that visceral fat, so fat that we don't see but is on our organs, is more associated with early death and all-cause mortality. So let's start with aerobic exercise, so simple walking, that's all that means. Pretty cool and motivating study here shows that just walking 10,000 steps a day can measurably decrease abdominal visceral fat, so organ fat such as fatty liver disease, in just 14 days, which is amazing. So essentially, you can take control of your potentially a life-threatening disease with just walking in 2 weeks. So that's amazing. Let's do it. Effects of exercise and caloric restriction on insulin resistance and cardiometabolic risk factors in older obese adults, a randomized clinical trial. And we always like these. These are interventional trials, not epidemiological trials. We see results by measuring an outcome. So we had 24 participants. They were average age 65. They were sedentary and an impaired fasting glucose, meaning they were diabetic. So they were randomized to exercise or exercise combined plus a 500 kilocalorie reduction in calories per day. So exercise training consisted of walking on a treadmill or a cycle, starting at 60% of their heart rate max and increasing to 80 to 85% by week 4. 12 weeks were monitored. Now, the exercise only group didn't change their energy intake, so they were still eating perhaps more than they should to lose weight. They were thinking of it from that way, just caloric restriction. Both groups experienced significant weight loss, but the reduction was greater in the exercise plus caloric restriction group, which we can assume is true. Both interventions improved insulin sensitivity, and indices of metabolic syndrome such as blood pressure, waist circumference, glucose and triglycerides, high density lipoprotein levels remained unchanged, and total abdominal subcutaneous and visceral fat, aerobic capacity, and total and low density lipoprotein cholesterol were also improved. So pretty interesting. You can still be not cutting your calories and you can still improve your health just by getting some exercise. Let's look at another study if we don't believe this. Normal exercise even with a caloric surplus. So let's see. What did it show here? Following a 2-week period, the inactive group that wasn't doing 10,000 steps a day, so the one that was only doing 1,500 steps a day, so it's I don't know how they did this, but they somehow managed to do this in the study. They forced people to only walk 1,500 steps a day. I would go mad. I would go crazy doing this. So following a 2-week period, the inactive group experienced a poor glycemic control. So essentially, these patients were already on their way to diabetes. So kind of concerning here. Data from this study suggests that frequent habitual exercise with its inherent mild weight loss had a significant beneficial impact on body composition, the risk factors associated with metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular and metabolic disease in older obese population. The addition of a diet-based weight loss program in the exercise intervention did not lead to greater improvements in these older obese adults. So very interesting. We see this again, that just exercise can offset a lot of the damage associated with metabolic disease. Just exercise alone. We're not even talking about diet yet. So really, both two studies show that walking 10,000 steps a day can prevent death. So pretty cool stuff. Anaerobic progressive resistance training on weight loss. So this is the bodybuilding, weightlifting sort of deal, growing your muscle. So 2 sessions per week of progressive resistance training without a weight loss diet significantly improves insulin sensitivity and fasting glycemia and decreases abdominal fat in older men with type 2 diabetes. So again, we see this. Don't even need to focus on a diet. You just start working out. Long-term participation in progressive resistance training independent of change in weight can result in some improvements in inflammatory markers in older overweight adults with type 2 diabetes. Brilliant. One thing to note here is that so muscle is more dense, doesn't take as much space up, but weighs more than fat. So this could be why some of these studies are showing that these patients aren't changing their weight. It could be that, yeah, they're losing fat, but it's being replaced with muscle. Muscle weighs more than fat. So maybe your scale isn't going the way you hoped it would, but just rest assured that if you're growing muscle and getting stronger, the muscle is weighing you down. And that's a good thing. We don't want fat weighing you down. Other benefits of progressive resistance training in elderly: improves resistance to injury from falls and enhances cognitive function. It improves your insulin sensitivity and glycogen storage, so that maybe you can allow yourself some carbohydrate sometimes. It improves pain as well. It is well known that exercise can help pain syndromes. BMI measurements, we talked about this a bit briefly, give a false sense of health. So twice weekly progressive resistance training decreases abdominal fat and improves insulin sensitivity. Here's another study. So visceral and subcutaneous abdominal fat decreased significantly by 10.3%, while no changes were observed in body mass. So this is quite significant. If you're not motivated because your weight isn't changing, get your abdominal visceral fat analyzed, either with an ultrasound. It's pretty easy for your primary to order this. They can look to see if you have fat on your liver. Maybe they want to go fancy and get a DEXA scan or an MRI. Sometimes some institutions can do this and analyze fat. And then maybe you can get a marker before you start your training program and maybe down the road, and maybe that can motivate you if your scale isn't moving in the right direction. There's other ways to measure real fat as well. We've talked about that in other lectures. But needless to say, it's pretty important because it is an independent risk factor of all-cause mortality. Now let's get into a little bit of the diet part of weight management. So calorie in, calorie out. So this has been mainstream for a very long time. Unfortunately, I have to say it's not a solution for many people. Many people can't cut their calories long term. Maybe they can do it short term, and pretty much all the studies show this. Yeah, it can work short term if it's controlled, if you have a nutritionist, a trainer telling you what to do. But the moment you get off this, people kind of go back to their old habits. It's really not a long-term solution. This lecture is about long-term solutions for weight management. Proponents of calorie in, calorie out say it follows the first rule of thermodynamics, but it fails to consider the complexity of the human body, longevity, diabetes, optimal human health, and it ignores the second law of thermodynamics. There's an interesting article you can read if you want to read about that. So, there's a lot of IG influencers who say this is the only way to lose weight, and anyone who says anything differently is unscientific, but unfortunately, that's just not true. So let's go through some of the science here. Here's an excerpt from from that study I linked to up there. In nutrition, one component of inefficiency inefficiency is measured in thermogenesis, so thermic effect of feeding, or the heat generated in processing food. There is a large literature on this subject, and the general conclusion, as summarized in a recent review by Jacquet, is that thermic effects of nutrients is approximately 2 to 3% for lipids, and 6 to 8% for carbohydrates, and 25 to 30% for proteins. It is interesting that this data itself might be enough to explain the metabolic advantage of nutrient density. So they're saying here that eating a more nutrient dense sort of meal utilizes more energy, and you can actually lose weight just by following a more nutrient dense diet. But not only that, let's go into this a bit more detail. So here's an example of some things I eat. I eat beef liver, and we can see how many calories is in some beef liver. One serving size is 113 grams, and it contains 150 calories. And here's one bagel. It contains 230 calories, and that's just one bagel. Now, say you ate 150 grams of liver. I doubt many people could actually do that. It's super nutrient dense. You eat a few slices of liver, you are stuffed. You do not want to eat any more. And that's most likely because it's super full of vitamin B12, iron, vitamin A, pretty much every vitamin and mineral you can think of, liver has it. Now I could eat probably 3 bagels, like a big guy like me. I could probably down 4 bagels if I really try, 5 if I'm a hog. And I could eat probably maybe 700, 800 calories worth of bagel, and I'd probably be hungry 2 or 3 hours later. Not to mention the huge spike in blood sugar that I would get from that. So, no, if we just think of it realistically, a calorie is not a calorie. And anyone who says something like that is a fool. I'm sorry to say. Nutrient density, we skipped one. And low carbohydrate, high fat diets. So yeah, we've discussed low carbohydrate diets on this channel a lot. Let's go through a couple more studies. So low carbohydrate, non-energy restricted diets appear to be at least as effective as low fat, energy restricted diets in inducing weight loss for up to 1 year. So obviously all these studies, they don't follow patients long term. Usually they're about 1 year or less. Effects of low carbohydrate versus low fat diets on weight loss and cardiovascular risk factors, meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Let's see what they found. Low carbohydrate and non-energy restricted diets appear to be at least effective as low fat, energy restricted diets in inducing weight loss up to 1 year. So why are these low carbohydrate, high fat diets helpful? Diets high in protein and or low carbohydrate produce a 2.5 kilogram greater weight loss after 12 weeks of treatment. Neither macronutrients or specific differences in availability of dietary energy nor changes in energy expenditure could explain these differences in weight loss. So the findings of this meta-analysis spurred a discussion among the peers in the literature editor as below, because there's always controversy with this sort of thing, oddly enough. Let's see, what do they say here? They're talking a little bit about how fructose can trigger the pathology of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, especially if the patient already has NAFLD, how adding glucose or drinking fructose, that sort of thing, it pretty much goes right onto the liver. So unfortunately, yeah, it is still controversial in the literature, and it's not mainstream yet to recommend nutrient density and low carbohydrate diets for weight management to reversing diabetes. But we're on this channel, we're all about looking at this data and utilizing it to support empowering people to change their health, take their health back in their own hands. Well, they're going to go through a couple new theories going on out there. We have the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. Kind of an interesting, I don't know if I believe in it too much, but it does give a kind of an interesting model for why a carbohydrate-rich diet might promote obesity. Let's see. A lifetime of high glucose-stimulated insulin secretion, likely in conjunction with typical diets consumed by individuals in these cohorts, is obesogenic. These findings lend additional support to the carbohydrate insulin model of weight regulation, which postulates that diets high in glycemic load promote weight gain through the anabolic effects of increased insulin secretion. Now, bodybuilders recognize this very well. So if you've ever seen a powerlifter or bodybuilder in the gym consuming, say, a gummy bear or some sort of glucose or carbohydrate, what they're doing is they are spiking their insulin. Bodybuilders know very well that insulin is anabolic. And what are bodybuilders and powerlifters trying to do? Well, they're trying to get stronger. They're trying to get bigger. They don't really care about the damage that something like this can cause. They just want to focus on getting bigger. And we know very well that bodybuilders do some unhealthy things sometimes, but it doesn't matter, and that's fine for them. But we're here on this channel, we're trying to improve our longevity, our lifespan, and our health. We're trying to become fit and live a long time while doing it, while looking good. So I don't really recommend consuming sugar during your workouts. I try to avoid consuming too much sugar in general. I think that carbohydrate on occasion is fine, especially if you're a fit person. It can go right into your muscle and you're going to utilize this. But consuming loads of carbohydrates long term, especially if you're an obese individual, this might prove to be harmful, especially if you're trying to lose weight. So here's another one, the Ros Theory of Obesity. This is kind of a wacky one, but I feel like it does hold some merit. So if we think about some animal studies and what farmers do, we can look at some mouse studies and see how you can make a mouse obese by feeding it a diet high in inflammatory oils, canola oil, soybean oil. Farmers know this very well. They will put this in feed for their poultry and their hogs to make them fatter. And these animals get quite rotund. But it also makes the meat profile kind of pathologic, I would say. So less healthy. Their meat becomes very inflammatory and potentially could promote disease. And this might be why many of the studies that vegans will often promote, showing that meat is harmful, this might actually be true if we're looking at animal source foods that are fed this sort of diet. So these animals actually become quite sick, and if we're eating sick animals, we're going to consume that inflammatory meat and potentially cause harm to our arteries, potentially increase our risk of early death from heart disease, as many of these vegan promoted studies show. So that's my take on this. So the Ros Theory of Obesity might actually be true, at least if we look in animal studies. And why can't this apply to humans? Well, of course it can apply to humans. If we feed a human a bunch of soy and canola and grains like we do the poultry and the way we make the animals and the cows fat, yeah, we can make a human fat by this. It makes sense. We're the same as these animals. So poor sleep, low energy, low exercise, and high cortisol. Yeah, difficulty losing weight. Sleep is pretty important. You want to try to get those 8 hours of sleep, achieve that REM so that your body can rest, reduce that blood pressure, reduce that cortisol so you have energy for the next day. Don't use benzodiazepines, Benadryl. These are sedatives, is what knocks people out. This is not real sleep. The only sleep aid that might be beneficial is melatonin, like a low dose of melatonin. A lot of patients with obesity have sleep apnea, and this also promotes poor sleep. It's kind of like a never-ending cycle. They are fat and then they have trouble sleeping because their windpipe is compressed at night, and then they are tired throughout the day and their cortisol is high, so they're inflamed and they can't get the weight off because they can't walk. It's a perpetual self-fulfilling prophecy. Get checked for it. So many people have it. Stress, again, low energy, binging calorically high. I said high caloric, low nutrient. Bringing calorically high nutrient poor foods. Yeah. This is affecting a lot of people throughout the U.S. A lot of stress. And you have to figure out ways to reduce stress because stress is synonymous with cortisol, stress hormone. And if cortisol is high, it causes disease, it causes weight gain. Yes. So any ways we can reduce cortisol is important. Conclusions: visceral fat reduction is perhaps the most important goal you can have. BMI measurements are essentially useless for this. Aerobic exercise works especially with the addition to diet, but may even work in a caloric surplus. Progressive resistance training works to make muscle more insulin sensitive and will allow the individual to use carbs more efficiently if these are in the diet. Calorie in, calorie out, CECO works in the short term. It can also work if you have a personal trainer and someone monitoring you and hounding you about it every day. But that's a bit hard for a lot of people, and people can't do that long term. The ROS theory and the CIM theory may give us a little bit more of an idea of what we can think of focusing on if we want to change diet. There's plenty of interventional studies and solid theory underlying the metabolic advantage of low carbohydrate and nutrient dense foods for weight loss. It just makes sense, and we have data to back this up now. And cortisol is a stress hormone. You have to try to reduce this, avoid stressors, poor sleep, work stress, corticosteroid use, alcohol, tobacco, you name it. You know the reasons for stress. You have to try to limit them. Takeaway points: so eat for nutrient density, not for caloric density. Avoid seed oils. Limit carbs, especially if you're on the metabolic syndrome spectrum. If you're an athlete, you can enjoy some carbs sometime. That's another story. Exercise, especially if you overeat or eat fun carbs, because the data is there that essentially you can just walk it off. I hope you all enjoyed this lecture. Again, you can find a link and read all the source material for yourself, which I always recommend. I'll see you next time. Bye.